as we're recording on July 2nd, we also do not know the status of one trade request put in by Mr. James Harden. So how are we feeling? I think we can start with Devin here. We've started with Devin since Toronto at the very beginning. So what's going on in Philadelphia?
Well, first off, before I mention James Harden, I just want to say that I really hope they give Maxey his bag next year. I'm sure they will, but it was very unfortunate he did not get his extension this year. I understand why. Financially, they're going to have only 2 or 3 other guys under contract next year and a ton of cap space. And especially with James Harden walking, they might need that cap space next year to sign someone. I haven't looked at who said free agents could be next summer, but they might need that flexibility to bring in someone alongside Joel if Joel doesn't indeed ask out with James Harden's move. Now, James Harden asking out, I did not expect it. I thought it was just he's a free agent. He's going to go. But we're seeing more and more so again this year, just like the past few years. Free agency is just not the way guys change teams anymore. It's just not. Like Jalen Brunson and Fred VanVleet are the premium free agency signings of guys that have changed teams of the last 3 or 4 years. It just doesn't happen that way anymore. It's sign and trades on occasion, and more often than not, it's just guys request to trade. And even more so to an extreme extent in James Harden's case, he was a free agent and opted in so he could be traded. That's just the way it works now. So you have way more leverage to actually go where you want to be. And I don't see a way where a James Harden trade makes Philly better. No team that is going to be trading for James Harden is going to say, hey, here, take an equally as good player. They're going to be sending you salary fillers, probably a decent young guy, and some picks. So there's no way Philly improve from this. There's no way Philly remain amongst the top of the teams in the East, like the Celtics, like the Bucks. They're probably going to drop a tier below. Now, they're still going to have Maxey. They're still going to have Embiid. They're likely still going to have Tobias Harris for next year, and he probably steps into that third option role more so this coming year than he has over the last couple of years. They'll still be good. They'll probably still be a top 4 or 5 seed in the East, but there's just no way they're going to get any return for James Harden that helps them next year. Now, they might add a couple of more first-round picks with that cap space the following year. They're going to have flexibility to be able to potentially make a star trade. Maybe Tyrese Maxey gets involved in that. I hope he doesn't, but it's possible, and it's an option they'll probably keep open. That could become a sign and trade for Maxey next year, and he sees his way out of Philly, and they try to make one last push before Embiid becomes an unrestricted free agent in a couple of years. So there's not going to be many avenues for Philly to improve this offseason. Their free agency was evident of that. Patrick Beverley's in, but Niang's out, Shake Milton's out, McDaniel's out, none of which are key guys, but we're all fringe rotation guys for them at points in the postseason. Beverley will come in and replace James Harden's role to some extent. I mean, it's a rotational guard, but he's not doing what James Harden is doing. He's just a guard at this point. He's not James Harden. So they're in a tough spot. It was definitely not what was expected. Sure, is it better than him just walking to Houston for nothing? Evidently, yes, but still you're getting put in a spot where your best asset might be an average starter, and that might be all you get as a guy who's actually going to come in and impact your team next year. And that's a tough spot for Philly to be in whilst they have the reigning MVP heading back into next year.
Yeah, say what you want about James Harden. Even as up and down as he can be, and he has been, even for Philadelphia, the man is still one of the premium offensive players in the NBA. Like what he can do as a playmaker, and on some nights as a scorer still. Like you don't find that a lot, and it's going to be pretty much impossible, like you said, Devin, for Philadelphia to replace him. Like they're in a tough position. I mean, it was very courteous of James to, opt in, so maybe they will get something back, but it's not going to be even half of what James Harden has been able to provide for them. So they're pretty much fucked. I'm going to be honest. They're pretty much screwed, man. Like this upcoming season, there's really no way that they're going to be on the Bucks level and the Celtics level. And they're definitely, like I said, they're going to be a tier below that. And even like losing those fringe rotation guys, those are still guys that maybe if given a bigger role, like maybe Shake Milton given a bigger role could have been better for them than just losing James Harden for, whatever the pieces back. We don't even know what they're going to get back in return. So they're in a tough spot. it's going to be tough. Like Maxi's going to have to take an even bigger jump, and he's been taking leaps and bounds every single season. So that's not out of the realm of possibility that he can take another leap. But man, like a team that was one game away from making the conference finals, and this was probably their year to make that championship jump. That window might have just been shut closed on them, especially with James Harden requesting out. So they're just in a very, very difficult spot now. And, shout out to Patrick Beverley. I'm a Patrick Beverley guy. He's not going to bring half of what James Harden brings to this team offensively. So they're just in a very difficult spot. And a lot's going to be asked, even more of Joel Embiid this upcoming season.
Which is a terrible thing, noting that the more you want to put on Joel Embiid, as much as he might be top 5 player on earth, what's the issue with Joel Embiid? Well, it's always been his availability. And if you're going to put every single thing on Joel Embiid, that's not really a good recipe for a guy who you want to kind of manage the amount of minutes he's playing, the amount of games he's playing, just the amount of wear and tear that goes on his body throughout the course of this season. A thinning of the roster does not really sound like a recipe for success to them. I think my favorite point you brought up is about that championship window being closed. I've been a big proponent of saying that their championship window opened in probably about halfway through 2018 when they brought in Jimmy Butler. They had Simmons when he was still a great player. They had Embiid. They had a great supporting cast around them of guys, and they had enough to get it done. They didn't. That was okay, but then it fell apart very quickly. Jimmy left. Ben Simmons forgot how to play basketball, ended up getting out of there, and they got very lucky in the sense that James Harden was really the extension of that championship window. They went from the core that they had and Simmons and Embiid to saying, oh, you would think, yeah, when you trade a star away, usually you don't get another star back, kind of like what we're saying with James Harden. But with Ben Simmons, I don't want to even argue about it. He was still a star player, and they traded him, and they still got another star back in James Harden. And that was supposed to be it. Now it's like you come out of this, and they really screwed themselves over. If they would have made the coaching change a little bit earlier, I think things would have been good because their season kind of ended the same way it always did. They went up in the second round, and then they folded at the very last second because Doc Rivers, LOL. But now looking at this, it's like, yeah, I think Devin's right when he says if you get off of James Harden, you're not going to get another star back. They proved us wrong once, and they got a star back in the Ben Simmons deal. But going now, it's like, yeah, their window really might be closed. And you look at Joel Embiid, who's 29, and it's like we can't really build young around him because young these days is like 8 years younger than Joel is. And it's easy to forget that because he took so long to actually start playing games consistently. He didn't play more than like 35 games in a year until 2017-18. So he's older than I think we even assume he is. At this point, I don't really know what Philly does because I'm always the guy that comes in and I say, oh, well, if you're not competing for a title, you might as well rebuild unless you're up and coming. You either need to be getting better every season or you need to be trying to get the best assets possible to rebuild unless you're a top contending team. And Philly's just in this weird spot where of teams that have a top 5 player, they're the only one that off the top of my head, that I can't really think of competing for a championship because I'm like, well, Jokic, they just won. Giannis, they won 2 years ago. The Warriors with Curry, they won like 1 year ago. All these guys, like that's probably 4 out of my top 5 right there. And I don't know.
The only team would be Dallas if you consider Luka.
Yeah, if you consider Luka top 5, but even so, like Luka was very young, and they've been trying to put pieces around him to build a roster there to compete for a title. Now, did they fall out once they made the Kyrie trade? They may have, but what they did in the draft this year, even adding some pieces in free agency, I think they're doing a decent, really just fine job of building a roster around those two. So they're still what I would consider up and coming, even if Kyrie himself is a little bit older. Because your core centerpiece was Luka, I think they get a pass there. So of the other 4 of what most people would probably consider the most common top 5, they're just this team where it's like, yeah, I don't think they're getting better anymore. But you guys also just said, yeah, I think they're going to be a tier below what these top East teams are. And that's not a good recipe. That's a very, very bad recipe moving forward. And I don't want to say just oh, trade Embiid, get him out of here while his value's high, like I'd say for a ton of players, because if you have Joel Embiid on your roster, you got to capitalize on that because there's 30 teams in the NBA. How often is it that you get a top 5 one? Not very often. So, especially one that wants to stick around and has never shown any signs of like, I want to leave, I'm on the fence. Like a guy that, as far as we know, is always Philly, Philly, Philly. Like he's the process. He kind of embodies the city. I don't really know what their future looks like long term. I think they can still be like a 4 or 5 seed next year and maybe do a little bit of damage in the playoffs, but I don't see the Embiid second round curse ending. And it just kind of puts them in a place where they're stuck. And what's the timestamp at? 53:52. I really hope they do not enter purgatory. One
of my homies said that they're the Portland Trailblazers of the Eastern Conference. I'm like, nah, I don't know if it's that deep, but it might get to that point, bro, because they're stuck. It's not like you said, they're not going to trade Embiid, especially because you just got Nick Nurse in there. So it's not like you're going to trade Embiid. Devin mentioned a Maxey trade. Like, that's probably what it's going to come down to, and I'm with Devin. I don't want to see that happening, but that's probably what it's going to come down to. So they're in a very, very, very poor situation for a team that, like you said, has a top 5 guy or a fringe top 5 guy, however you look at Embiid. But there's no avenue for them to get better and really jump into that championship window to where it's like, okay, we are one of the best teams that we're definitely going to win a championship or at least be right there competing for one this year.
Yeah, and like outside of a Maxey trade, like their option is just to be in the middle of the playoff picture this year and then hope that their cap space next year can get them someone that gets them over the hump. But like it's Jaylen Brown, who probably doesn't walk. He's either probably traded or he's extended, or it's Pascal Siakam. And then that's about it. Then you're looking at like DeMar, Tobias Harris, who's their own guy, Klay Thompson. Like there's nothing there that's really pushing them over the top to be that title contender. Like maybe you bring in Siakam, you get enough depth guys, maybe that does it. But that's probably the only option. And I still don't think he's walking either. That's probably a guy who's either extended or traded as well. So there's very few options there for them, but that's probably the game they're going to have to play at this point. It's going to be a Maxey trade, or it's going to be a let's just be okay with being in the middle this year and hope that we can make that move next year in the offseason. If they don't, then yeah, like you said, Gabe, they're just in purgatory at that point.